Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of After Class Podcast. Today we have Kabir. Kabir is one of the English tutors at Proficiency Education, but our guest will get Kabir to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Kabir. I study arts and law at UNSW and I went to Baulkham Hills High School in 2023. I chose to tutor English at ProEd, primarily year 12, because I feel like a lot of students are not good at it just because they don't like it and they were never told how to appreciate it or why it even matters to get good at language skills. So I think that's something that I focus on a lot.
So Kabir, we're going to have a quick conversation today, mainly to help the students and the parents navigate the kind of importance of English and why it's crucial to start developing certain skills from a younger age that will ultimately get them to a point where they get to year 12 and they sit the HSC, that not only are they going to get good marks per se, but also their interests and their understanding of literature and writing is just that much better, that much stronger.
I guess there's two aspects of that. One is getting good at language skills. And then two is, like you said, the texts teaching you something that applies to people and situations in daily life. I feel like the skills of language writing are so underrated because you don't see it until it actually works. Job interviews is a very direct application of that, or resumes. I help people a lot with resumes in my own time because it's a very critical and sort of niche skill that doesn't actually come with anything you do. There's no course for how to do job interviews or how to get good at writing a resume. But those things are very obviously important, and they're not something that you get kind of intuitively without an understanding of how to use language to your favor. For example, I helped someone, my friend, who didn't have much luck getting many job interviews, applications successful, and I spent 1 hour, I said, okay, it's kind of like answering an English question, and the question is, what makes you good for this job?
Yeah.
And I changed every line in the resume to fit the question, oh, what makes you good at this? What makes you a good tutor? And she got the job call back on the same day. And so that skill only comes from having an understanding of what it means to answer questions that you're given in a way that makes sense to people. You have to think about what people feel when they read what you write. And that skill is something that we don't really realize is going on when we're studying high school English. But once you actually get good at it, it helps you in ways that you can't think about. For my own personal life, I am in the Film Production Society at UNSW, and I got a role as a writer for one of the films that they made. It was a competitive selection process. There were about 4 applicants for the role that I was doing. The way I got my role was a specific line I said, and I used an analogy in my interview that helped to get me above the other people.
Yeah.
I had to submit a short sample script based on what the director had described. In my particular version, I wrote a scene that was very much in tune with what the director had in mind, specifically not entering any of my own creative twists into it. And when they asked me about why I did that, I said, I imagine the writer's role to be like the hands and the director is the brain. If the hands start fighting against the brain, then nothing works. And then the next day I found out I actually got the job.
Yeah.
So that kind of very specific, very niche, on-the-spot, moment-to-moment skill of being able to express your ideas in a way that feels new. When you say stuff that everyone else is saying, it sounds like noise. It's something George Orwell wrote in his essay called Politics and the English Language. When you use cliches, if you say something is as big as a mountain, even though it's supposed to conjure an image in your head, it doesn't work because it's been used before. So when you're able to use language in new ways, people automatically pay attention to it.
But at the same time, I feel like most people, they don't do that, right? Imagine the kind of stigma is when they get to year 12, they're just memorizing essays and trying to get that good mark. But ultimately, what's happening in that situation is they're not actually using the language skills that they should have to be able to come up with, as you said, new ways for you to kind of go outside the box and try to be a little bit more innovative, creative when it comes to delivering these ideas. Whereas for you, it's like second nature. You're quite aware and you're well versed in it to a point where your brain could just naturally go in those directions. And I feel like that's what every student studying for the HSC should probably be practicing. More so kind of like, what are the actual skill that you develop in that situation, isn't it? You had a second point. What was the second point again?
Second point was about seeing parallels between books you read and situations that you actually go through. Even in nonfiction, where books are about advice or maybe history, they give you examples of little anecdotes just to make it more accessible to you to relate to what's going on. There's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, and there's this anecdote that this guy gave about how this new employee in the business world would get into doors by being more friendly to the people that he met. So one example that he gave was to ask the CEOs or the people higher ups that you meet questions about their personal life. He says, "Oh, I read all your books. I really like this part about when you were young and you were in the business world fresh and you didn't have any idea what was going on." And then he kept talking about his own life, oh, your kids and this and that. And by showing his interest in this guy's personal life and his career endeavors, the CEO actually liked him better and he got a higher position in life just based on his ability to take an interest in other people's ambitions and success. And that's something that I only got clearly when I read this book, and particularly this anecdote about a businessman trying to make it and not making it in terms of his qualifications or even his education level, but because of his ability to find what people want you to say and what they want you to feel about them. You find that there's a much stronger basis to create a mutual bond between you.
At the same time, you could use very basic language and not drive that point home. Anyone can just go, "Oh, I like how you started this company."
Yeah.
Or versus, "Oh, you were in the trenches, you were working so hard," you know what I mean? Like, I really admire the fact that, you know what I mean, you had this passion and drive to kind of deliver this product to the world.
I guess that skill of knowing what words to say, that comes from reading stories as well. Because when you read stories, you read dialogue between people. They say things in a way that maybe you wouldn't have thought of immediately. It's not really intuitive to you, but once you start reading it over and over again, it actually does become intuitive to you. And I guess that comes from the process of what the writer is trying to achieve. The writer is trying to create a narrative that tells you a message on purpose. Once they go through that drafting process, that revision, those edits, the product that's created is specifically designed to make you think differently. And so when you absorb a lot of stories, you inherently end up having a better way of expressing yourself and a better understanding of what you need to say to actually express what you mean. A lot of difficulty that what students have, and which is the purpose of, I guess, the English subject as a whole, is to be able to turn what's in your head into something that other people can understand.
And not misinterpret.
People need to know what you mean the first time with clarity and with precision.
Exactly. So you don't have to get offended or be misinterpreted or be impatient as well, because you have to repeat yourself.
A good orator is able to say something once and people know exactly what they mean and what they want you to feel.
Yeah. And in a way that's powerful because you can change people's minds. You can change their perspectives in the way that you deliver the information. And you can make it resonate with them to a much deeper level, or you can make them care more, right? By just tweaking some of the words, and the story could still be the same, but it's the way that you deliver it, as you said, it's going to make the big difference. So let's talk a little bit more about the technical side, I guess.
Okay.
Why do you personally think that a student should start actually improving English skills and read more in terms of the English literature as early as possible?
First is because the skills that you want to know, someone else has wanted to know it probably a very long time ago, and they wrote down the best way to do it. It's called books. From year 7 to maybe year 10, year 11, I didn't read at all. And then as soon as I realized that the best knowledge that has been created has been written down by the smartest people ever, I realized the method that they've written down already is something that I can apply directly. So there's the nonfiction element. Secondly, alongside the knowledge that you want to get is also the experiences that you go through. Those experiences have happened before too. And they've been transformed into really easy to read, or not easy to read, at least accessible stories that people resonate with just by reading them. So whatever you think you're going through, whether it's, studying, something that is going on with your personal life, family issues, relationship issues, self-identity issues, all of these things have been condensed into stories that teach you a lesson just by reading them. There have been didactic messages created by authors for thousands of years that have been curated into some select stories and perhaps nonfiction articles, essays, that tell you what to do. So whenever I have an issue with my personal life, I usually always turn to books for advice, because the advice that's provided has been written in a way that applies to me just because it relates to issues that everyone has. When you're a student and it feels like these things don't matter, you have questions that need answering and people have answered them. You just have to look in the right place, and it's usually not on Reels or YouTube. They're in libraries. The answers that you want exist, and they've existed for a long time. A lot of them are not written in, the 21st century. And the reason for that is because the answer for a really deeply human problem has been written a long, long, long time ago. I would ask students to remember that if you're studying a book from the 1950s, think about how long ago that was and how little most people matter. If you're living now, what are the chances someone's going to remember what you said tomorrow? The fact that these words have been remembered for more than a day means that they're more important than most things. If they've been remembered for 10 years, 50 years, 400 years, it means that they've been so relevant to the human condition that they must have some value. I think you need to take that for granted as a student, because otherwise it would have been forgotten. So just, when you're sitting down, you're thinking about why this matters. A lot of kids hate English. They feel like it's weird or unnecessary, and they don't like that it's compulsory. Just remember that you're studying wisdom that has compounded over thousands of years. It helps you accept that this is something important and worth doing.
And just to reiterate on that, the more you read, the more you understand and have the answers to problems that might not have appeared, but in the future they might have. How are you going to do that if you've not experienced that, you've not lived that, right? You're going to have to read it not only through the books that have documented the same thing that's happened in the past, but also how they were able to seek the right advice and the right solution. And even if you're not helping yourself, one day you might fall on that to, answer a question, or at the very least help someone that's important to you to be able to get that, right? So let's say, for example, maybe your parents may be struggling financially or in terms of the relationships, right? You obviously being someone that doesn't really know what they're going through, you can't give your own personal take on it, but you as sure as can get the take of some expert or maybe multiple experts, right? Because you can come at the same problem from different perspectives as well that could all be the solution to the problem.
A friend came to me once and he told me he's thinking about switching uni because he doesn't have much going on right now, but also he knows everyone there and it feels like everything's the same and it doesn't feel like he's getting anything new from the experience. And also by knowing everyone there, it kind of carries over old drama, old issues, and it feels like it's not what you want out of a new experience in life. We just came out of first year. You switch from high school to uni. You want things to be different, and it felt like it wasn't different enough in the way that he wanted. When I read that message, I remember this passage from Seneca. And Seneca said that when you are fed up with life and you go traveling to fix your problems, to escape them, it usually doesn't work because the problems are with you. He said, how can you run away from your problems in a different location when you took it with you? And I said to him, chances are you may not have to change location to fix whatever issue you find with your current university experience. It might just be your perception of it. And he stayed. So when you read things and you become familiar with it, you're able to unconsciously find the patterns between what you read and what you go through. And then ultimately, it's not about, as soon as you read something, you have to think, oh, how does this apply? When you have this kind of knowledge bank of different books that you read, eventually it'll apply because these are about things that people go through. They're about stories that apply to people.
And imagine you didn't read that and you weren't able to give him that advice. He would have to figure that out for himself, which would cost him time, money, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's ultimately you can treat it as an experience. But why need to go through that if someone's already spent time and money to experience that? And they documented it to tell you that they've done that, isn't it? That's basically what it is. So the reason why I chose that uni in the first place was that uni had something that was to offer that other places couldn't offer, and that was what sold him. Then, okay, he comes across these issues. Imagine not knowing what to do and not knowing that the problem was with him, so he had to self-reflect. Goes to different unis, spend time jumping around different courses, only to realize that the first course that it was initially in was his actual calling, right? Exactly. But then by that time, what? Time is gone, energy is gone, money is gone, because going to different unis, you're spending money on these different courses that actually weren't, going to benefit you. All of these things would be sacrificed if you just read more. I want to ask you an interesting question. You know how Shakespeare is such a big aspect of the English syllabus, right?
Oh, yeah.
From year 7 to year 12. And we've been talking about how there's a reason why this thing has lasted so long. What is the importance of Shakespeare? I think the kids need to know this because everyone, they think, oh, Shakespeare is just boring. It's like stuff in the old days, you know. But like, what is the main reason, in your opinion, that we study Shakespeare even to this day, even though the society has changed so dramatically since those times?
It may be cliche to say that Shakespeare had a really good understanding of what people go through, but it's so true that we still do it. The only reason, like you said, that we study Shakespeare today is if he had an understanding of things that don't necessarily belong to only his time when there were kings and queens. I'll remind you of another quote from Seneca, the philosopher, to explain why Shakespeare matters. Seneca said that when something is written in verse, when something is written poetically, it resonates with you so much better than when something's told in a very prosaic and almost normal conversation-y way. For example, it's very obvious to us the fact that spending money too much and being obsessed with wealth is bad. We know that, but day to day, it consumes us anyway, at times. But when you read about it, the message hits you so hard. For example, in books like The Great Gatsby, where you see him literally die because he couldn't give up the chase for using wealth to fill inner gaps of what he really wanted, which was just love. When you see it happen in a story that is so viscerally crafted on purpose by an author, it hits you differently. And I guess the importance of Shakespeare is that he created the stories that do this best in Western literature.
Not only just through the character, but through the plot and through the underlying message, and makes that message, which is a timeless message in most cases, make that relevant to you and make that memorable to you. Now, Pride has gone through a lot of changes when it comes to the English course. We recently decided that students shouldn't be fixated on the text that they study, but more so the module that the text falls under. Why do you feel like holistically in terms of the students' actual personal development and not just for getting a good mark in the HSC and in the exams or whatnot, but holistically, why do you feel like the way that Prod is doing it now, right? By understanding the themes and modules rather than just the text that they study is ultimately the correct and best move for the student.
The modules are separated into different aspects of what it means to use literature in the way you think. The first one is called Text and Human Experiences. We take that for granted, but human experiences is an important topic that we should be studying in school. You know how a lot of times in high school, kids can feel like what they're studying is not relevant to their daily life. That's a very common complaint in high school. I remember thinking the same way. But there's nothing more important and topical than human experiences that applies day to day, because that's just what we do. When you have a whole module dedicated to it, and you study the concepts that underlie what exactly you're trying to discover about people being you, right? People being what you do, what you go through, why sometimes you do things that are dumb, why sometimes you scroll reels even though you want to stop. These kinds of weird things that don't really make sense do make sense when you understand the motivations behind it, which is part of the module. When you study the module as a whole, and you use your text as an example of what people go through and why, which is something that you don't really understand day to day, just going through life. Because again, these authors have used thousands of years of wisdom from their own reading, condensed into a new story to explain that message. When you use that text as an example of what it means to go through daily life with an enhanced knowledge of what you are as a human, why you do the things you do, to make better decisions, to make more informed choices about where you choose to live, what you choose to do with your time, how you choose to spend money, who you choose to hang out with, associate with. When you use literature to inform that choice, that is something that applies overall to the concept of human experiences and not just about the specific experiences that are listed in your book. When we study the whole concept through the rubric and then use the text as an example, we get a better understanding of why we're doing this in the first place instead of just studying one book in particular. And then the other big module that we're doing in module-based classes is Module A, which is called Textual Conversations. Textual Conversations is talking about what we discussed earlier, about how some texts are preserved throughout time to such a degree that they're still relevant to us today. At the same time, like you were saying with Shakespeare, some things simply don't apply. We don't have such emphasis on monarchies and religion. Textual Conversations is about using the core message of what a composer like Shakespeare had written and updating it slightly to fit what we understand about today's world. But the core message stays the same. And the idea of doing that is to show you what stays the same between humanity then and now, what changed, so what's different between what we believe now and then. For example, religion. Not as many people are religious, and not as many people are as strongly committed to their religion as they would have been back then. People were really governed every single day, every aspect of their life by religion, what they wear, what they eat, who they look at, who they talk to. We don't have that anymore. And so a lot of the underlying religious context that informed Shakespeare's conversations and dialogue in his plays, for example, the female characters maybe wouldn't have had as much agency, they wouldn't have spoken as many lines. That's something that's changed now, and that doesn't invalidate the fact that the core message still applies to us. So Textual Conversations is about why do we still study such an old text, and why would a new composer even bother using an old story? Why would you even bother? If you can tell any story you want, why would you tell Shakespeare again? And there are reasons for that. We study those reasons rather than the book. If you study the reasons, then the study of the book will come more naturally.
Yeah. And then ultimately, I feel people don't understand, once they get to, let's say, for example, Mod Z, that's an opportunity for them to show the market what they have to say by trying to emulate, replicate, use inspiration from the texts and the sources that they've read to kind of now channel in one part of their beliefs or one part of their ideas, right? And then try to deliver that, as we've been talking about today, as strongly, as precisely, as directly as we can. That's what it is about. But if they don't start studying that and they're aware of those issues and aware of the ideas and can kind of put a finger to what they were going through or what they're thinking about, that there's no actual way for them to deliver that message clearly, precisely, and in an interesting manner. Why do you feel it's not actually important in the broader scope to actually just focus on what's being done at school, but more so to do it in that specific way that's going to benefit them the most? Why did we do it this way?
Okay, first of all, there's a practical element where you only have 3 real teaching terms in your year 12. Term 3, very beginning, is trials. Meaning term 4 of the previous year, term 1 and term 2 are the only times that you have to learn 4 modules. That's 3 terms, 4 modules. You have to split them up a different way. You have to. Otherwise, you won't finish. The way that many schools adapt to this is by ignoring Mod C. Mod C is probably one of the more important modules because it is very different. It's the opposite of other modules. Instead of looking at texts and figuring out their meaning, you take the meaning of other texts and you figure out how to say it differently. That is an equally important skill, especially when we were talking about the overall skill in life of being able to turn your ideas into words that other people understand. So when people neglect that, they miss the point about what we're trying to achieve by studying English in school. You know, we have to think about why the government wants everyone to do English at least a little bit. We are aligning with that idea of everyone needs to study English, not module by module, by making it about improving your self-expression and analysis skills rather than improving your technical skills of answering a HSC question.
Exactly, because ultimately, they're not even going to remember that question next year. But the development process, that's going to mean something for them way down the line into their life, isn't it?
When you start thinking about the little details, you start thinking about why are we doing this? What is the goal of studying these texts together? What is the goal of studying human experiences? When you start thinking of it that way, it truly becomes much easier to excel in school and also to get something out of it after that.
You know what was really interesting, Kabir? Some students are like, oh, for this module, I prepared 10 essays, right? Why would you need to prepare 10 essays if you understand that module from every single aspect, every direction that they can target you from in terms of the question, right?
Right.
If you understand it to that level of detail, and you can portray that, which is ultimately what this is all about, right? You shouldn't need to memorize 10 essays, because even in that situation, what happens if it's the 11th essay that you didn't write?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just kind of silly. But at the same time, do you agree that they can't just develop these skills in the year of the HSC, right?
Oh yeah.
It's not possible, right?
Yeah.
How early do you feel that they need to be starting to kind of focus on these ideas and concepts so that when they get to year 12, right, they can just write? You can give me any question, you can give me any topic about the module. I've studied the module, I've developed the skills now to be able to study it, right? So that I don't have to memorize essays. How long do you reckon that process would need to be in order for a student in year 12 to be able to get to that level where they won't need to rely on memorizing essays?
I would say, first 3 to 4 years are trolling. It doesn't really matter. But the truth is, the earlier you start anything, the better you're going to be at it when the time needs you to be good at it. If you pay attention, at the very least, to what the value of this is in year 7, if you understand why you're studying literature from the 17th century in year 7, if you even understand the concept of the fact that this matters to you as a little kid in the 21st century, if you can understand that at the very least, you're going to have a huge head start on the kids in year 12. If you just understand why. Because what happens is, here's the, chain reaction. You understand why this matters. In year 7, if you understand that Shakespeare is about what people do day to day today, then, in year 8, year 9, year 10, year 11, you do Shakespeare in all of those years. You eventually get smarter as you go, just as you age naturally. And you also understand why these particular examples are given to you in school. In high school, you don't do all the Shakespeare texts. You do some that pertain to very critical social issues today. For example, Othello. You do Othello in maybe year 10, year 11. Othello is about race. When has there been a time where race is not an issue, right? And how many people watching this are not from Australia? You know what I mean? And so,
like everyone.
Literally
the
everyone.
ancestors legitimately don't belong here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's everyone.
Yeah.
And so when you're reading about being an outsider in a place that doesn't feel like it fits you, how can you say that that doesn't matter? And when you're used to thinking that it matters, eventually you'll find the message faster than other people. And then when you find the message faster than other people, you're going to have a much easier time writing it down. Finding the message and writing it down is year 12 English. And if you think about what's the message earlier, you'll be better at writing it down later.
Yeah.
Writing it down is not as important when you're a little kid. When you're in year 7 to 10 even, your ability to write it down will get better as you age. You learn writing tips. But if you can understand why you're doing this, why this matters now, you're going to have a better time in year 12. So I would say even in year 7, if you know what's going on, why you're studying Shakespeare, why you're studying these books, that's all you really need.
And just be exposed to those messages and ideas as early as possible so you can be exposed to more, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you don't know what kind of student you are. You're young, you're in year 7. How do you know your learning habits and styles and what resonates with you the most, right? That you want that runway to be as long as possible. How good would it be, right? When you get to year 10 and you're already like, I'm ready to take the HSC. Because then you'll have such an easy time to do that advanced English that you're like, I need a bigger challenge. I can do extension 1, extension 2, isn't it? Whereas if you don't have that runway, imagine if someone like yourself clicked in year 10, I need to try more seriously. But they aren't capable of doing it because they're not you. That they need 4 or 5 years to do the same work that you did in 3 years. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how passionate, how much they want it.
Yeah.
In our previous episodes, we brought it up that the human body can only take so much before it fatigues, right? And then everyone's tolerance is different. My tolerance is only this much and your tolerance is this much. You can do 5 times the amount of work in the same amount of time than me, and that's where your progress comes from, right? But I need to build the tolerance to that for me to be able to do the same amount of work as you. And if I don't start early and I start too late because I have a late realization, I will never be able to get to that result in year 12. Not because I didn't try hard enough, but it's because I didn't start early enough, right? But the thing is, you have to do it the right way. Like, memorizing essays is not a skill that you need to start practicing in year 7, right? Be aware of the issues. Be aware. Developing the skill how to draw the ideas and the information, right? And eventually, because you can draw it fast, you can start working on how to deliver that and produce the information as you go.
I think the biggest thing that English helped me with in life is that it makes you realize that you are capable of solving your own problems. When we're going through life and it feels like we don't have any guidance, we get kind of confused and we start to spiral and we don't know what's going on. For example, in school, a lot of people have mental health issues. People don't have the tools they want to have to be able to overcome whatever mental health, personal, physical issues, insecurities that they have, and bring their best version of themselves to school every day and to get better grades and to have a better life. I think the best thing that English taught me is that you are capable of finding these answers yourself. As long as you read a little bit all the time, eventually you'll be able to solve the problems that you have. That's the best thing that students can get from English.
Yeah.
The worst feeling that you can have when you're growing up in these weird mental conditions is that your problems are beyond you. When you feel like the problems in your life can't be solved, I guess that's where things really start to spiral, and that's when you enter the trenches.
Yeah.
But English in particular tells you that you can get out of the trenches by yourself. You can find knowledge, you can choose what to take in.
And yeah, there's obviously a lot more discussions that we're going to have in the future. I'm glad that everyone got to meet you today, Kabir. And you guys will be seeing Kabir probably more times in the future, and we'll have other discussions and other kind of topics that we'll need to talk about. Yeah, cool. Nice.